Good morning, everyone. The ASA Women in Industry is proud to bring you a Washington update presented by ASA's Director of Government Affairs, Dan Hills. Dan will be answering questions at the end of his presentation, and you can type your questions in the pane on the right of your screen throughout the presentation. So now let's go to Dan to take it away.
Thanks, Amber. I appreciate this opportunity, and I want to thank the women in industry for this, for their interest in this opportunity to present this webinar. We'll probably have you back at your desks or the counter at about the bottom of the hour, so let's go ahead and jump right in. But before we get started, as always, we certainly want to thank the great companies you see here and groups you see here that are ASA supplier partners. Without them, many of these programs could not be possible. And we absolutely appreciate all their strong support in everything we do. So as you can see here, we're really going to start from the top down, looking at the White House, which everyone is watching, the presidential race. Then a couple of Senate races worth watching. Then see if any of you live in any of the House races that are up for grabs, and finally how you can get involved. ASA has a number of resources and tools that can help you get involved personally in the election process. So it goes without saying, this is probably one of the more underwhelming and underenthusiastic elections, certainly at the presidential level. Many folks I've talked to, both in Washington as well as outside of Washington, they're not enthusiastic about their candidates, but that's where we are. In many ways, it's kind of like a race between Lance Armstrong and Ryan Lochte. Just can't bring yourself to root for either of them. But come January 20th, either President Clinton or President Trump will be raising their hand on the Bible and swearing the oath of office. So let's dive in and look at how either of them are going to get to the 270 votes needed to win an election in November. Now, as you can see, overwhelmingly every poll right now, as we know, has Hillary Clinton ahead of Donald Trump. She's clearly in the lead. I've seen a number of polls that taking toss-up states like Ohio or Pennsylvania or Florida, out of the picture, and she still gets the 270 votes needed. But how does she get there? One of the things she needs to do is she needs to keep the Obama coalition intact. What that is back in 2008, certainly in 2012, there were millions of first-time voters, who really didn't have anyone to vote for in the past. They didn't want to vote for George Bush or Al Gore. They didn't want to vote for Bush or John Kerry. But President Obama really energized millions of Americans, many disenfranchised, younger first-time voters, African Americans, to vote for the first time. She needs to keep that intact, and Donald Trump, conversely, he needs to pick off many of those voters. As many of you see now, he doing a lot of outreach to the African American community to try to make his case to them. But he's got a tough hill to climb. As you can see here in just one snapshot, in Pennsylvania, which is widely considered a purple state. It's not red, it's not blue, it's really a strong battleground state. Hillary Clinton is up big. But if you dive deeper, Donald Trump is actually winning. He's up pretty big against the Secretary Clinton, against the less educated whites without college degrees. So he does have a path, albeit a mixed path, and what he needs to do is make sure that every single one of these voters that he has identified and the party has identified as generally reliable Republican votes to come out and vote for him. And again, the Secretary Clinton needs to keep that Obama coalition intact, get the first-time voters from 08 and 012. She needs them to become third-time voters and come out and vote for her. Let's look a little deeper at some of those numbers. As we said, right now the white voters make up the largest population. As you can see in that third bullet, white voters make up about 73% of the electorate. It was 79% back in 2004. Mitt Romney won 59% of white voters, but the turnout was dropping. John McCain, for every 100 voters, he got 55 white voters. For George Bush, every 100 white voters, he got 58 of those. No one got as high as Ronald Reagan on his landslide, getting 66 out of 100 white voters back in 1984. But the truth is that is a decreasing electorate. White voters are shrinking, and the electorate that's growing are non-Hispanics, which cast about 98 million back in 2012. So that's decline. Hispanics voted in record numbers back in 2012, almost 18 million. I'm sorry, blacks voted about 18 million for President Obama back in 2012, along with about 11 million Hispanics and almost 4 million Asians. Again, that's the Secretary Clinton's. That's really their voters' wheelhouse, who they need to keep intact to come out and vote. Some of the numbers, the very last bullet, I just saw this number this morning. You know, Trump is losing the college graduates by almost 30 points in the state of Colorado. Now that's obviously just one state, but the key is he's losing voters that Romney won in 2012. Same thing in my state of Virginia. He's losing voters with household incomes of $50,000 or higher by almost 14 points. Same thing can be said for women voters. The soccer mom or the hockey mom as voted for in 2008. Trump's losing them as well. Those that were reliably Republican voters, Trump has also lost those, which are just numbers I saw this morning. So what are Republicans to do? You know, this isn't unlike 2006 when Republicans started distancing themselves from the Bush administration and the Iraq War, or 2010 when Democrats started distancing themselves from the Affordable Care Act. But what happened in both instances? In 2006, the House flipped for the first time since 1994. In 2010, it flipped back, and Nancy Pelosi became Speaker. You can only distance yourself so far from the top of the ticket, from the president or the presidential candidate. You can only distance yourself so far for voters really to find that believable. But the numbers that Trump has right now, it does give many Republicans at least the chance to rebuke them. Say, you know, he's my nominee, but he does not stand for what I stand for. But that's an unclear gamble. Certainly in the back of everyone's minds, if not the front of their minds, they have to keep in mind that he won the nomination. He beat about 12 to 15 seasoned politicians. He beat them all. So you have to remember that the folks that elected him or got him the nomination are the folks that you want to vote for you. But at the same time, you have to remember not to alienate the moderates, the ones that are sort of down the middle, center-right Republicans. So that's a key challenge for those below him that are on the ballot. As you know, many Republicans, particularly in the national security realm, have come out against Donald Trump, and at least 4, I think that list is growing to about 6 senators have denounced him. And I saw a couple of weeks ago a very vulnerable Republican representative from Colorado, Mike Kaufman, filmed a commercial saying that he's never met Trump. He does not know the man. He doesn't stand with him. So he was the first one, but he's probably not the last. But to be fair, Secretary Clinton's also doing the same to many of her candidates. I know in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire governor is challenging the sitting senator in New Hampshire, and she's been asked during an interview, and that was played over and over again, whether she thinks Secretary Clinton is trustworthy. And that's really puts them between a rock and a hard place. Whether you stand with her or against her, you have millions of voters that will judge you on that. So what's keeping many of these candidates down? Well, certainly both of them have pretty low unfavorables, although Clinton's unfavorables are not as bad as Donald Trump's. Trump's got a big lack of experience. It's important to note that he is the first, not since Dwight Eisenhower has there been a major candidate with zero elected office experience. I think we'd agree Eisenhower at least spent an entire lifetime working in the government, so he certainly had that as a vast resume. Donald Trump has no experience in government. As we mentioned before, national security. There was a growing concern that A, he doesn't have the background in national security, and B, does he have the temperament to have that finger on the button? Is he going to will his temper, will his judgment send our troops or push the button that you can't unpush? And then finally, populism, which really was what got him the nomination, in my opinion. He railed against trade agreements that traditionally have been a Republican position. Republicans generally are supportive of free trade, but Trump went against that, and he's captured millions of hearts and minds of folks that agree with him. So looking over at Secretary Clinton, as we said, she does have high unfavorable numbers, and a lot of that can be attributed to her trustworthiness. Going back to the trade argument, she too has come out against trade, particularly the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a major trade deal that President Obama really wants to get through. She's come out against that. But it's a little difficult to judge where she stands because she was part of the previous Clinton administration that passed the North American Free Trade Agreement. So she was for trade in the past. Now she's coming out against it. So we're not too sure where she'll be on that. I'm just part of political dynasty. I think millions of Americans are just they get tired of the same person in and out of office over and over again. We've had that with the Bushes. Now we're having that with the Clintons. So I think that's something that she has to fight against. And then can she energize Bernie Sanders' base? I think that one the Democrats did a good job at their convention of coalescing behind the candidate. At the end of the day, which we'll mention later, the key thing for Sanders folks are Supreme Court nominees. That should be and is a key driving force for millions of voters. Is the next president, whether it's Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, they're going to have the opportunity to name at least 2 to 3 Supreme Court justices. And I don't know one Bernie Sanders voter that is willing to give Donald Trump that opportunity. So at the end of the day, the majority of them will likely vote for her. Then finally, she still is scandal plagued. She has the email problem that is still in the news as of this morning, and the Clinton Global Foundation, their family's foundation. What will its role be if she's elected president? What has its role been when she was Secretary of State? Did they take money from countries and then give favorable access to these countries as a result? So those are really some of the challenges that both candidates have to battle against to get your vote in November. So moving over to the Senate, often called the world's most exclusive club, but I think as we found particularly with Senator Rubio, it's a frustrating place to work because so much doesn't get done. I know it's frustrating for former governors who go and they leave the governor's mansion where they can get a lot done to being just one of 100, and they get very frustrated going to work in the Senate. So let's take a look at some key races there. Currently, the makeup it's 54 Republicans to 44 Democrats with 2 independents. One of those being Bernie Sanders. I think we'd all agree when he picks sides, he's going to pick the Democratic side pretty much most of the time, rather than the Republicans. So it's about 54 to 46 right now. And the senators that are up right now, they came to Washington in 2010. That was when the Republicans retook the House. That was on the coattails of the Affordable Care Act on the coattails of the stimulus. This is when the Tea Party first came to fruition. So this is when the Republicans retook the House in 2010, and in 24 Republicans were elected to the Senate. So they're up again, and as you can see there, the same thing happened in 2012. About 24 came to Washington who were reelected with the president. It's always easier to run with a popular president, which is why in 2018 you had a lot of Democrats that were up, but they're going to be up. They're going to be up again in 2 years, in 2018. So as you can see here, there's a lot of battleground states that the Democrats are looking to pick off. Arizona, this is going to be John McCain's toughest reelection. Florida, that one's really that one's not yet determined just yet. North Carolina is going to be a challenge as well. Those are the ones that aren't even traditional battleground states, which we'll get to in the next slide. Now the key thing here is all of those states on the right side, Barack Obama won those states, and they have a Republican senator up for re-election. So assuming Hillary Clinton wins those 7 states, those Republican senators have to convince enough voters to pull the lever or push the touchpad for Hillary Clinton, but also pull the lever for them, which is a very, very significant challenge because folks, and we have a slide, folks don't cross over nearly as much as they used to. So that's a big challenge for a lot of incumbents like Ron Johnson in Wisconsin or Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania. They have to get literally one more voter to cross over and vote for Hillary, but also vote for them, which is a challenge, and it's more challenging with Trump being at the top of the ticket for a couple of them. So just looking there, as you can see on the far left, there's about 5 toss-ups. Those toss-ups, with the exception of one, Harry Reid's district, are all Republicans. I saw a slide just yesterday taking toss-ups off the map. The breakdown would be every single one of those seats in the toss-up column would flip. So you'd have a pickup of 4 for the Democrats in the Senate, although the Democratic seat held by Harry Reid flipping over to the Republicans. And so the breakdown was 50-50 with the vice president casting the tying vote. So hard to say if that's going to cause more gridlock or less gridlock and force them to work together. So and as you can see here, there's far fewer vulnerable Democrats. Like I said, only Harry Reid's seat in Nevada is really the only one that's considered a toss-up. I would say the one in Colorado, lean Democrat, has moved to likely Democrat. The seat there was won by I was just reading an article this morning. The seat there was won by a gentleman who I don't believe has much elected experience, and he's fully embraced Donald Trump in Colorado, and that's probably not going to get him to Washington in the fall. Just another look here at you see there we've got 6 toss-ups for Republicans. That's going to be a challenge. I'm not sure I don't know if this slide reflects it, but there's a late entry in Indiana. As many of you know, those of you from the Hoosier State, former Senator Evan Bayh has jumped into the race, and by all accounts, he's going to be going back to Washington. In fact, they're so confident that he'll be winning that there's already articles about where he'll be on the committees that he used to sit on. Will he overtake some of his former colleagues and regain the seniority that he once had? So I believe he's up by about over 15 points. I think I saw between 17 and 18 points. He's up there. So that's going to be another gain for the Democrats in Indiana. As you can see there, that's the open seat, Senator Coates in Indiana, that he's going to be likely, possibly replacing. So as you can see here, most of the Democratic senators, they're in strong strong districts that Romney had no chance of, or strong states that Romney did not win. But conversely, you've got about five Republicans in states that Obama won. So that's a big challenge that many of them, a number of them probably may not be going back to Washington. Although that was predicted. I know that as soon as the Republicans got the majority back in 2014, the first articles coming out was how short-lived it was going to be. But as we said earlier, there's a number of folks that came to Washington with the president's re-election in 2012 that have to go up for re-election again. A number of them, only a couple of them in conservative states like North Dakota, West Virginia, Indiana, Missouri, and Montana. Those will be Democrats that are going to face strong challenges. There'll be a strong recruiting effort on the Republican side to get challengers for them. Then looking way ahead down to 2020, again, Republicans have a lot of seats to defend. If I have not mentioned it, it's easier. It's harder to defend seats than it is now to be a challenger. It used to be truly that incumbency had its advantages. In many ways, it does. There are fundraising challenges or advantages, but you have a record to run on when you're an incumbent, and that's the biggest challenge, because you'll see. Especially when we want things to get done in the Senate, they won't vote. It happened under Harry Reid. He wouldn't allow votes, and it's happening now under Mitch McConnell. He's not really allowing votes because their number one job is to protect their vulnerable senators, and doing that is to prevent them from taking tough votes. And as I said before, ticket splitting it just does not happen anymore. Getting a voter to vote for a Democratic president and a Republican senator, or a Republican president or a Democratic senator, it unfortunately does not happen nearly as much as it once did. I'll be the first to admit I don't cross parties. I think a lot of folks here probably don't cross parties. That could be, one of the sources of our problems is folks are unwilling to cross parties, but statistically that's been proven that they don't split tickets nearly as much as they did in the past. So now we're going to go over a little bit spend some time on the House. One of the first charts that we'll see in Washington as a postmortem of the House elections is the percentage you won by. Anyone who won just over 50%, even from 50 to 55%, they are going to get a strong challenger. The opposing party will work hard to recruit a challenger because they only won by the slimmest of margin by a presumably weaker candidate. And as evidence here, President Obama, he won in 25 Republican districts where there was Republican congressmen. Bob Dole is a great example where he's a Republican that won in his district, but President Obama won big. This is suburban Illinois, and he's probably one of the most vulnerable Republicans. Further down, Governor Romney, he only won in about 5 Democratic districts. And Congresswoman Ann Kirkpatrick, she's asterisk there. She's actually running for the Senate against John McCain. I think maybe this might have been one of those reasons why she barely eked out her election back in 2012. So she's going to challenge Senator McCain because she may not have been coming back in 2016. So could the House flip? Chances are slim. Democrats need about 32, a net gain of 32 seats. That's going to be a challenge. It'll be a loss of 30 and a gain of 30 to retake the House. And as you see there really aren't many toss-ups anymore, and that's just a sort of a function of gerrymandering. Sort of both sides have sort of gentlemen's agreements where they draw their own districts. But at the end of the day, this does make a strong argument why you need to continue voting, because many of these decisions are made at the state level. Republicans won big in 2010 at the state level. They won back a number of state houses and it was after the 2010 census that they redrew a lot of congressional districts. So at the state level, it does elections certainly matter there as well if you want to protect, if you like your congressional seat. Will it flip? No, but the margins are going to get closer. As we said, the Democrats they couldn't have done worse in 2014. A lot of 2000, it hasn't been said, presidential election years are when voters come out, not so much in the off years. So Republicans won in a number of districts that are traditionally Democratic districts. So they're likely to gain those back, but they may not gain enough. As we mentioned before, there's been a lot of redistricting, but there's been a lot of court challenges with them, and the courts threw out a number of those maps, particularly in Florida, North Carolina, and here in Virginia. But it's not enough for them to get to 30, but they're going to get more, and they're going to close that margin. And finally, open seats. Open seats are sometimes easier to take back from the opposing party. A lot of times you'll have that area's local assemblyman or state senator who's from the opposing party. He finally he or she will get that chance to finally run. Or oftentimes it'll be someone who's challenged the House member in the previous cycle, gave them enough of a scare that they'd rather retire than run for re-election or a rematch against that same individual. But as you can see, open seats, they're often the most sensitive to the up and downs. So it's really all the way at the top of the ticket really matters for a lot of House seats. So let's dive in and see if see some of the congressional seats. As we said, there's only about 36, and that number goes up or goes down. There's not that many competitive seats. Truthfully, the biggest source of competition really is the primary. In Washington, when we're looking for key House members to get their support on something, a lot of times we'll look at what their primary is. And they'll tell us, let me get through the primary, then we'll be with you. Their right flank or their left flank is often the biggest challenge for them, and once they get through the primary, then the general is often not as big of a threat. And as you can see here, with probably less than 36 House seats that will be close. Now the Northeast, as you know, the Northeast will be solidly won by Secretary Clinton, so that's a challenge for a lot of these House members. Most of these, in fact, with one exception, the seat on Long Island, these are all Republicans that have challenges. Them embracing Donald Trump is probably not their best. Not the best thing for their job security. But with him at the top of the ticket, it's going to be very, very difficult. And again, the South, the solid South, usually most of those states will go for the Republican candidate, Trump, at the top. So that's why you'll see fewer Republicans being in the toss-up or leading category. If I hadn't said a competitive race are those that are toss-ups or lean. Midwest, certainly there will be a lot of battlegrounds here. Certainly Ohio, Illinois, Minnesota. There's a number of seats up there with a retiring chairman. Michigan as well. So there'll be a lot of battles here. Brad Ashford, who knocked off an incumbent in Nebraska. He's a Democrat. He knocked off the incumbent Republican. He recently gained the endorsement of the Chamber of Commerce. So he's a rare Democrat that got a lot of the business community's support, because he's someone that we can work with. He's been very, very supportive on the overtime issue. So there are opportunities to work across the aisle. We've found. Then finally on the West Coast, as many of you know, California has a rather unique system where it's the top two. So there could be potentially two Democrats running first and second, or 2 Republicans. It's usually in California, it's probably 2 Democrats in many of these districts. So they have a challenge. Mia Love at the bottom, she's had a couple of ethics issues. She spoke back in, I believe, the 2008 Republican convention. She was a rising star that is facing some challenges. And I'd mentioned Utah being a generally reliably red state is now on the map for Hillary Clinton to win. So that's a big challenge there in Utah. So what else is there to know? You know, as we know, the election is usually I believe the phrase is the first Tuesday after the first full week in November. But as we know, we were talking earlier, it's getting easier and easier to vote in different ways. You can vote, certainly you can vote in person on November 8th, but you can also vote early. You can vote absentee, but every state is different. I would strongly encourage you to look into your state's election system, not just to see when you can vote, but also to make sure that you can vote. We know through a program that we're a participant in that I'll show you on the next slide, almost 1 in 8 have had issues with their registration. So it's important to check that early. As we mentioned before, we may not be supportive of who's at the top of the ticket in our party. We may not like our senator, but it's still many would argue our duty and our responsibility to vote. Because as I said, the next president will be naming 2 to 3 justices to the Supreme Court. Obviously, we know there's 1 vacancy right now. We believe there'll be probably a couple of more vacancies, and those are seats that will be filled by someone who will be there for the next quarter century. So as it says here, just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. As we say, the folks that make the decisions in the Capitol building have an impact on your lives and your businesses directly. How else can we get involved? ASA, as we know, has a political action committee, and we're the only political action committee in Washington, in the United States, that works to elect pro-PVF and PHCP plumbing, supportive plumbing candidates. We're the only political action committee that represents plumbing distributors in plumbing manufacturers. So love for you to consider getting involved. You can get involved locally, nationally, statewide. We'd love to work with you and hear from you on election issues. So finally, how can you get folks that you work with? If you're on this call, this webinar, it's because you're interested in politics, as are millions of Americans. But there's also millions of Americans who just could care less, and that's always, participation's always been a problem. Folks that don't bother participating, they don't think it matters to them. But as we've relayed, it does matter to them. It's so many different levels. ASA is a participant in the Employer Voter Registration Week, which is actually going to be when ASA is at our national convention in New York City, the last week of September, and it's you can actually find this logo directly on ASA's main landing page, or you can go directly to employeesvote.org. As leaders in your company, you should know that folks behind the counter, in the warehouse, in the trucks, it's been proven. It's a fact that they find their managers, their supervisors, their employers to be one of their greatest influencers when it comes to elections. And we know. Don't tell them who to vote for, but just mention to them, the next president is going to name 3 people to the Supreme Court. That has a huge, huge impact. Many of the executive orders that are being issued in the past year, NLRB decisions, EPA rules, OSHA rules, most of those get decided in the courts, and many of them end up at the Supreme Court. Who, depending on who is seated there, has a big impact on you and your company. as we see here, it is critically important to participate because at the end of the day, by not voting, you're really indirectly giving a vote to the candidate that you don't support because you're not giving your vote to someone who you do support. So with that, look into the little dashboard to see if we have any questions at this time. I don't know that I'm seeing any. Amber, are you seeing any?
Nope, there's nothing in there right now. But
all right,
let's give them a minute for people to...
Yeah, stay a little longer. Well, it does not appear that we're getting many questions. I think many folks know how to get in touch with me, dhilton@asa.net.
Dan, you have one in there?
Oh, we do have one.
You have several in here.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that, folks. Oh, okay. All right. Well, the first one mentioned, besides Scalia and Ginsburg, who do you see leaving the Supreme Court? That's a good question. Justice Kent, I did do some research, including Scalia. At least 4 of them, so now it's 3, are well into their mid-80s. Justice Kennedy, he was appointed by Reagan, I think back in '86. A couple of others. I do think a couple of those. It's a difficult issue to talk about on the campaign trail. Although, as we know, Donald Trump got into it with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, so he might have at least raised the issue. But it's a challenge to talk about. That's why I do think a lot of activists, I use that word, I think they're the ones most committed to the judicial issue. Printable posters to register for Vote Week. We absolutely have that stuff. We're going to be doing a couple of mailings, electronic mailings. We do have you do have a lot of literature if you want to display in your office, in your break room. So I'll be getting that out shortly. I appreciate that reminder. Another question is, what type of policies we'll be advocating for in 2017. This is the closest we may get. I think we've given up on reform in the past couple of years. We knew the president in the Congress was too far apart. A lot of folks think Secretary Clinton will be amenable to tax reform. And it's important to remember the last time we did major comprehensive tax reform was back in 1986, and that took a number of years before they actually got that accomplished. So I think we're in the same phase of this has taken a number of years to get accomplished. I think in some ways it's hard to imagine, but I think the Affordable Care Act, as we see with so many of the big 5, as they're called, insurance carriers dropping out of the Affordable Care Act, I think some sort of rewrite or at least tweaks to that law are possible. Another good question on the congressional visits program. Certainly, we see day in and day out. You see the politicians with hard hats and the work glasses, the safety glasses, touring a facility. That is a great opportunity to invite your elected officials, reach out to their district office to share with them not only what you're doing, but remember, those that you employ as well as those that you do business with are their voters. You may have a counter day or a customer appreciation day. I've always advocated inviting them to come out to that because, you know, we're an industry that a lot of folks are still not aware of, unless they're a plumber or a home builder. In Congress, they may not be aware of where their water heater or where their plumber is getting their items from. So there's certainly opportunity to showcase what you do as a business and who you work with and work for. And certainly I was. If we haven't mentioned it, those of you going to Network ASA, we will be in Manhattan in the fall. Certainly invite you to join us for our PAC event. This is at its basic form. This is a political action committee is a collective of individuals. Putting their money where their mouth is to support our industry and our association. And I encourage folks to join us. We're going to be having a strong presence in New York City for the full week. We'll be in the not the rotation, but we'll be in the room with the rotation to answer any of your questions. So look forward to seeing folks there and continuing to answer your questions. See if there's any more, Amber. I think that was our last one.
Yep, that looks like it's everything.
Well, I appreciate everyone's interest in this and taking part in the political process. We will be in touch, and I encourage you to get in touch with me, and if we can answer any of your questions or help get your team more involved. Thanks again, everyone.